Let me set the scene for you. I was 7 and my mother was dating a man with a daughter who was about 16. Her name was Annie, and while she didn't live with us, she did come and stay over with us on some weekends. The reason I am mentioning this will become important a little later. I grew up in a somewhat remote area in the Midwest. My mother's house is on about 80 acres, most of it being dense forest. For the most part, it was quiet, the type of place where people didn't lock their doors and everyone knows each other. Well, it was quiet, until one event shook the community to the core. There was a man just a couple streets over from mine who murdered his girlfriend's entire family, including her. This all happened in their house around 2 weeks before these events over dinner. It was also found out that he murdered his own mother and father right after the whole girlfriend incident. He was never caught for his atrocities, and the local police were working along with the police in Iowa to try and find him, as there had been reported sightings of him there. My mother had gotten a security system installed after all of this just to ensure our home was properly secured. We had alarms in every window and door in our house. On this Saturday, my mother got called into work as she was an apartment manager, and there was an emergency she had to tend to. Her boyfriend had gone to work earlier that day, so it was just me and Annie at home. My mother was extremely nervous about leaving us alone, but due to the emergency, she had no choice. She thought it would be best if Annie and I stayed at home all day and didn't leave the house, as we would be safer this way. So she thought. She said that if we needed anything, then she was just a phone call away. Annie and I made sure that all the alarms were properly set and the doors were all locked just in case anything were to happen. My mother had been gone for about an hour, and we were deep into watching a Disney movie when suddenly the alarm started blaring. Annie and I immediately jumped up to see what the hell was going on. On the way to the alarm, you have to pass a large sliding glass door, and what we saw in it left us frozen. There was a man prying our door open with a crowbar. He saw us, made eye contact, and quickly ran off into the woods behind our house. He almost seemed startled, as if he wasn't expecting us to be there. However, I will never forget what he looked like or that sinister look he had in his eyes. We called the police as soon as possible, and then we called my mother, who was already alerted by the alarm company through her phone, so she actually arrived before the police did due to how isolated we really were. When we described the man to the police, they immediately knew who it was. It was the man that murdered his whole family. Of course, there was a massive investigation that was launched on our property and the surrounding forest that same day. In that very forest, they found cigarette butts, lots of canned food, soda bottles, and a makeshift tent made from some tarp and a bunch of bungee cord. The man had been fucking living behind our house this entire time and was even stealing food from our trash. He was arrested that same day in a town a few hours over from ours, and when in custody, he admitted to watching our family to learn our habits, knowing that he could take advantage of the house when nobody was around. Even now, as an adult, this event still stalks me. It just goes to show that you really never know who is watching you. When I was younger, I used to live in a relatively large town in Canada called Calgary. I lived in the suburbs, in the kind of area where people are usually a lot nicer to you, so my area was always known for its hospitality. I think that's what makes this story so unreal to me. The neighborhood consisted of mostly families and the old people, so it was rather quiet most days. There was, however, this group of boys that would often get into trouble for childish things like playing ding-dong ditch, but sometimes they would cause slightly bigger problems. Not long before this particular day, these boys decided to put duct tape on one of my cats. They had said they were mimicking some stupid video that had seen online. We needed to cut the tape out of his fur, and as a result, give the cat a lion cut. Needless to say, I was not a fan of those kids. One afternoon in summer, I had been outside on my porch reading when I see two of the boys running up the hill. I lived on the corner, so I could clearly hear them shouting that something was dead in the field. They seemed hysterical, so I didn't think it was a prank this time. In that moment, all I could think of is my cats. I was instantly terrified that they had done something to my fucking cats. I was scared that this time they had gone too far and murdered one of my cats. I ran towards the field where they were shouting from as fast as I possibly could, filled with the dread that I was about to see my cats dead in the field. Alongside the field, I could see some of the other boys clearly upset, asking if they were going to get in trouble. They said that the other boys are going to call the cops. and in that moment I was sure that they had killed something. I was sick with fear and anger, and when I asked them where it was, they told me it was over the fence just beside the field. Next to the field was an underdeveloped area with some trees and brush where many of the kids used to play, and so did I. I crawled through the gap in the fence and went to look around. As I walked through the area alongside the fence, there seemed to be tons of trash and all sorts of stuff thrown about. However, it didn't take me long to find what I was looking for. The smell hit me in the face like a truck before anything. It was this rotten, stale, and slightly sickly sweet smell that I will never forget and will never be able to describe. Amongst some of the other debris was an open suitcase, and inside it was something that I can't quite describe. What I saw looked like meat, but it obviously wasn't. It's not what you expect from all those documentaries on TV, as it wasn't covered in a ton of blood. I think my instincts realized what it was before my mind did. It still had skin, obviously human skin. I don't really remember what happened next, but I remember running the hell out of there. It just didn't seem real, and wrong on so many levels. It's not like this happens in real everyday life. You don't just find this shit outside of TV shows. People don't just find parts of another human laying there. The boys' hysterical screaming from earlier must have attracted the attention of the adults, as there were many of them heading towards the field, followed closely by police. Many people gawked from the entrance for some time, and eventually I headed back to my house and watched the situation unfold from my patio. Some of my neighbors spoke to the police and the press, but I refused to give my statement on anything. I couldn't really process what seemed like an outer-body experience to me. It just seemed too surreal to be true. What I saw that day was a piece of a person, a real dismembered woman that liked at the bottom of my street. It wasn't long before the police identified the victim, her boyfriend, and arrested him. Rumors started flying around that she was pregnant and that's why he did it. Some said that they never found all of her pieces. But the most disturbing one, no idea if it's true or not, was that her head was still in the freezer. What I do know is that it took both me and the people of the community a while to recover from this. What had once been a quiet little suburb was shaken so violently by something going on quite literally in our own backyard. When I was 10, my dad and I took a trip to see my grandpa down in Chihuahua in Mexico. I live in southern New Mexico, so it wasn't far at all. I wasn't close with my grandpa, mostly because he lived in another country, but also because my grandpa was a bit of a dick sometimes. I was honestly just happy to be going back to Mexico as I'm from there, and I've always liked it there. However, when we got there, my grandpa made an effort to be extra nice to me for some reason. He wasn't usually like this. He went out and got my favorite ice cream and ordered us pizza. I found this very strange. Nice, but strange. That night we stayed up watching movies and eating said pizza and ice cream. It got to around 11 p.m. and Grandpa advised me to go to bed as it was getting late. My dad was asleep upstairs. I tried to convince my grandpa that I wanted to watch one more movie, but he insisted that I go to bed. I reluctantly listened and went upstairs to bed. I had trouble falling asleep, probably because of all the junk food I had just eaten, so I tossed around for a good hour or so. As I was about to fall asleep, I heard noises coming from my dad's room. It sounded like stuff was being moved around forcefully, accompanied by muffled grunting. The noises progressively got louder, and eventually I heard 2 loud bangs. Gunshots. Those were definitely gunshots. I ran out of my room to the source of the noise, and what I saw has been burned into my mind ever since. There, near the doorway of my dad's room, was a pool of blood. As I peeked around the corner further, I saw that it was my grandpa, laying there motionless. I looked up, and my dad was holding a gun in his hand, gasping for breath, looking back at me. He immediately dropped the gun and ran up to me and hugged me. "I'm so sorry you had to see this. It's not what it seemed like, believe me," he said. I began to cry and question my dad why he had killed Grandpa. Turns out that the muffled sounds was my grandpa trying to suffocate my dad in his sleep with a pillow. Luckily, my dad brought his 9mm handgun over with him and was able to fight him off and, well, kill him. I say luckily, but this whole situation is fucked up. Apparently, my grandpa was in some deep gambling debt and my dad suspected that he wanted to kill him in order to take his car and sell it or something. The part he never mentioned was what the fuck was Grandpa gonna tell me? That Daddy died in his sleep? Or was he gonna kill me too? Either way, that day has taught me that unfortunately you can't trust even those closest to you, or ones that appear to be close to you. So yeah, thanks Grandpa for fucking traumatizing me for the rest of my life. At least I got a good lesson out of the situation. You should always carry a 9mm handgun everywhere you go because you never know.